Thanks for your service, my sister texted, attaching a photo of her brand new restaurant sign, paid for with the lake house my grandmother left to me. I was thousands of miles from home, sitting on a narrow cot in a dim barracks room I shared with 3 other officers when the message came through. My grandmother, Margaret, Maggie May to everyone who loved her, had passed away months earlier. In her will, she left me her house on Lake Meredith, the place where I learned to swim and where she hugged me the night before I deployed. While I was overseas, my parents forged my signature, sold the property for $450,000, and used every dollar to fund my sister's restaurant. The photo showed her smiling proudly beneath a wooden sign that read, Maggie May's Table. She named it after our grandmother, using the inheritance meant for me, and added a cheerful emoji at the end of her message. I didn't reply, not that night, not that month. My silence made them comfortable. They assumed distance and duty would keep me quiet. They believed I would return home, sit at the family table and accept it. They misjudged me. When I finally came back, I didn't go to my parents' house. I didn't argue. I walked straight into a courtroom carrying documented proof they never expected me to have. What happened there shifted everything. My name is Helena Wolfe. I'm 28 years old and a captain in the United States Army. This is the story of how my own family took what was left to me, and what I did next. 18 months earlier, when I received the call that my grandmother had passed, I already understood how my family operated. My father, Richard Wolfe, ran our household the way he had managed his bank branch for decades. Strict rules, tight control, no debate. My mother supported his decisions without question. My older sister, Vivian, was always protected and praised, even when her choices lacked direction. I was different. I joined ROTC in college and later accepted a commission in the Army. When I told my father during Thanksgiving dinner, he set down his fork and warned me I would regret it. He believed the military would use me up and forget me. My mother stayed quiet. But I knew my path and I followed it anyway. Vivian just stared at her plate that night and said nothing. When I left for officer basic training, only one person drove me to the airport. My grandmother, Margaret Wolfe. She was 74, barely 5'2", steady behind the wheel of her old Buick. At the curb she hugged me tight and said, "This house will always be here for you, Helena. And so will I." I carried those words through every deployment. I didn't know that would be the last summer I'd see the lake house with my name still tied to it. 14 weeks into a logistics deployment in the Middle East, I learned she had passed, not through a call but through a short email from my mother. "Your grandmother passed Tuesday. Funeral is Saturday. We understand you can't make it." 4 sentences. That was all. I requested emergency leave immediately and it was approved, but when I called home to say I was flying out, my mother told me everything was already arranged and that Dad thought it was better if I stayed focused on duty. I listened to my grandmother's funeral on a shaky live stream at 3 in the morning, watching Vivian speak about unity and family while I sat alone in the dark. Not one of the 200 people there reached out to me. At the time I thought it was carelessness. I didn't yet understand they needed me far away. 2 weeks later, I received an email from the estate attorney with my grandmother's will attached. I opened it in the mess hall. Her savings and personal items were split between my father and me. But the lake house on Lake Meredith, the one she'd owned for 31 years, valued around $450,000, was left solely to me. I read it 3 times to be sure. I stepped outside into the heat and called my father. When I told him about the house, there was a long pause before he said we needed to talk. He claimed she hadn't been thinking clearly near the end. I disagreed. He cut the call short, saying we'd discuss it when I got home. I stood there in the sun, phone still in my hand, feeling that something wasn't right. Mr. Darnell told me probate was moving forward as expected and that everything was under control. I wanted to believe him. I was exhausted, managing logistics on a forward base, sleeping maybe 4 hours a night. I made the mistake people make when they still trust their families. I assumed they wouldn't cross that line. Months passed. The deployment intensified with non-stop 14-hour shifts, supply delays, and convoy plans that changed every couple of days. I emailed my father twice about the estate. No reply. I called my mother. She rushed through the conversation and said Dad was handling it. He never returned my calls. Vivian sent me straight to voicemail. Late at night, lying on my cot, I felt a quiet sense that something wasn't right. One evening I called Mrs. Calloway, my grandmother's longtime neighbor near Lake Meredith. She mentioned seeing a for sale sign near the lake weeks earlier. My chest tightened. I told myself it had to be another property. After we hung up, I searched the county records online. Sitting alone in the communications tent just after midnight, I typed in the address. The page loaded. It showed the property sold on March 14th for $450,000. Seller, Helena Wolf, represented by power of attorney, Richard H. Wolf. My name was listed as if I had approved it. On that date, I had been deployed overseas. I stared at the screen, rereading it until the words stopped making sense. Then I called my father. He answered calmly. When I asked if he sold the house, he paused briefly and said it was the right decision, that my sister needed the investment capital and it would benefit the family. I told him he had signed my name. He said he made a decision for the family. I ended the call without raising my voice. I sat there in the dim light, steady and silent. Something inside me shifted, not broken but resolved. It didn't shatter me. It solidified me. In that moment, something firm settled inside my chest. I stopped reacting like a daughter and started thinking like someone who had been wronged. The version of me who would have pleaded or cried no longer existed. 2 days later, during a briefing, my phone buzzed. Under the table, I glanced at a photo Vivian had sent. A storefront with a freshly painted wooden sign in gold script. Maggie May's Table. She stood outside smiling in an apron, arms open wide. Inside, I could see neatly set tables and warm lighting. Her message read, "Thanks for your service. Grandma would have loved this." I stared at it for a long time. She had named the restaurant after our grandmother. The same grandmother whose lake house funded it. The same grandmother who had legally left that property to me. I didn't respond. Instead, I returned to my quarters and opened my laptop. I emailed Major Daniel Crow, a judge advocate general officer on base. Months earlier, he had briefed us on legal protections for service members. I never imagined I would need that information. My subject line was simple. I need legal advice. It's personal. I attached the county sale record, a screenshot of Vivian's message and a copy of the will. Then I waited. My silence over the next few months wasn't surrender. It was preparation. When I met with Major Crow, he asked clear, direct questions. Was I present during the sale? No. Did I sign a power of attorney? No. Did I authorize anyone to act for me? No. He nodded and explained that what happened appeared to be forgery, possibly additional financial violations depending on how the funds moved. Then he reminded me of something important. I had been on active duty. The law provides protections when service members' rights are violated during deployment. Courts pay attention to that. I asked if this could be resolved quietly within the family. He looked at me steadily and said, "They forged your signature and sold your property while you were serving. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a legal offense." The room felt calm, but the meaning was clear. This wasn't about family tension anymore. It was about accountability. Major Crow didn't soften it. "This isn't a family disagreement. It's a crime." He explained the process clearly. First, I would file a police report once I was back stateside to create an official record. After that, I'd need a civilian attorney to handle the civil case, while the district attorney could decide whether to pursue criminal charges. 2 separate tracks moving at the same time. He told me to document everything, every text, email, voicemail, and to stop communicating with my family entirely. Anything I said could complicate the case. That night, I created a folder on my laptop and named it Meredith. Over the next 3 months, it filled with screenshots, saved voicemails, call logs, and emails. My silence unsettled them. My mother's messages shifted from concern to blame within weeks. She said they were hurt, that I was being selfish, that they did what was best for the family. Vivian sent photos of the restaurant, decorated and busy, saying she wished I could see it. My father sent one message: "When you're ready to act like an adult, call me." I saved it all. Every word became part of a timeline I built carefully. My grandmother's passing, the funeral, the notarized power of attorney, the sale date, the transfer of funds. I matched each event to my deployment orders, which proved I was overseas when my name was signed. They were unknowingly strengthening my case with every attempt to pressure me. Major Crow connected me with a civilian attorney, Rebecca Hall in Raleigh, who specialized in real estate fraud. On our first late-night video call, she had already pulled the property records. She showed me the power of attorney document filed with the county. It granted my father authority to sell the lake house on my behalf. She zoomed in on the signature line. The handwriting resembled mine, but the details were wrong. The angle, the curve of certain letters. "That's not my signature," I said. She nodded and scrolled further. The document had been notarized by a local notary named Greg Parson. Rebecca's tone remained calm and precise. "If this signature wasn't executed by you in front of that notary, then we're looking at serious legal violations. The next steps," she explained, "would be handled methodically and by the book. This wasn't some simple family argument. It was a serious legal issue and I had to treat it that way." Major Crow made it clear that the first thing I needed to do was file a police report once I returned to the United States so there would be an official record. He explained that after that I should hire a civilian attorney to handle the civil case, while the district attorney would decide whether to move forward with criminal charges. Both processes would move forward at the same time. He told me to save everything, every text, email, and call log, and to stop communicating with my family completely because anything I said could make things more complicated. That night, I created a folder on my laptop with my grandmother's name on it, and over the next 3 months it filled up quickly. As I stayed silent, my family grew more anxious. My mother began calling repeatedly, leaving messages that shifted from concern to guilt and then to blame. She texted constantly, sometimes saying she was worried about me and later accusing me of being cold and ungrateful. My sister sent photos of the newly decorated restaurant, adding comments about how upset our mother was because of me. My father sent only one short message telling me to act like an adult. I saved every voicemail and screenshot, organized them by date and time, and sent copies to a secure email account set up with Major Crow's help. Late at night, I created a detailed timeline that showed when my grandmother passed away, when the power of attorney was notarized, when the house was sold, and when the money changed hands, all lined up with my deployment records proving I was overseas. The more they tried to pressure me, the more evidence they created. Soon after, I had a video call with a real estate fraud attorney in Raleigh named Rebecca Hall, who had already reviewed the public records. She showed me the power of attorney with what was supposed to be my signature, but even at a glance I knew it wasn't mine. She pointed out that the notary who approved it had worked with my father years ago at the same bank, which raised serious concerns. She explained that proper procedure requires the signer to appear in person or verify their identity remotely, and neither had happened. In North Carolina, she said, falsifying a document like that is a felony that can carry prison time and a permanent record, and the notary could also face consequences and lose his license. It was painful to hear, but she reminded me that my father chose to sign my name. She also warned that if my sister's restaurant had been funded with money from an illegal sale, those funds could be traced. Rebecca sent the document to a certified handwriting expert, and I provided official samples of my real signature from military and tax records. I also spoke with Maggie Calloway, who confirmed that my grandmother was mentally sharp when she signed her will and clearly stated that the house was meant only for me. Maggie even offered to testify if needed. Learning that my grandmother had anticipated this possibility and tried to protect me strengthened my resolve. Meanwhile, my sister continued promoting the restaurant online, posting photos and writing about family unity, claiming the business was our grandmother's shared legacy. Reading those posts while sitting alone overseas made it clear that I had never been included in their decisions, and yet they were presenting the story as if we had all agreed that I was never consulted. No one called to ask my opinion. Instead, my signature was copied onto a legal document so my sister could renovate a space, install trendy lighting, and buy restaurant equipment. In her mind, this was a heartwarming tribute, a granddaughter honoring her grandmother through cooking. Looked inspiring online, easy to like and share. The comments flooded in, praising her and saying Grandma would be proud. Even my mother posted a loving message under the photo. Not one person questioned where the startup money had come from. I captured everything. The photos, the captions, the supportive comments, the dates, even the number of likes, and forwarded it all to Rebecca. She responded quickly, pointing out that these public posts showed my sister using funds tied to a fraudulent sale while presenting it as a united family effort. The repeated use of the word family, Rebecca noted, suggested shared approval that never existed. She told me to keep records of every post, so I did. Each upload, each cheerful caption, each comment went straight into my evidence folder. My sister believed she was sharing a beautiful legacy story, but she didn't realize she was also creating a record that couldn't be erased. The money hurt, but what I learned next hurt more. During one of my regular email exchanges with Maggie Calloway, who had been kindly sending me memories, old recipes, and photos of my grandmother, she mentioned something that stopped me cold. She wrote that my grandmother had tried calling me repeatedly during the last 2 years of her life, always reaching my parents' house and asking them to pass along the message because she didn't have my direct number. Maggie said my grandmother once told her with sadness that I never called back and she worried I had forgotten her. I read that line again and again. My grandmother had always reached me through my parents' landline. That's how it had worked my entire life. But I hadn't received a single message from her in 2 years. Not one. I can't say with absolute proof what happened, but the pattern is hard to ignore. She called. He answered. I was told she was declining and confused. I searched for another explanation and couldn't find one that made sense. The thought that she may have spent her final years believing I didn't care was overwhelming. That night, I didn't cry over the house or the money. I cried for the lost conversations, for the missed chances to hear her voice, for the time we never got back. No legal decision can return that. When my deployment ended in August, I began the long trip home, flying from Kuwait to Ramstein and then on to Fort Liberty. After nearly a full day of travel and multiple connections, exhausted and tense, I switched my personal phone back on somewhere over the Atlantic, not knowing what would be waiting for me. When I turned my phone back on, I saw 11 missed calls, 6 voicemails, and 23 text messages, all from my mother. The most recent text had come in 4 hours earlier. They were all coming to pick me up. Vivian had closed the restaurant for the day, Dad was making my favorite pot roast and potatoes, and it was time to move past everything because they loved me. I could picture the scene perfectly. My mother holding a handmade welcome sign, Vivian carrying dessert, my father standing a few steps back, serious but ready to act like everything was fine. They were planning to surround me with warmth before I had a chance to think clearly, to turn it into a celebration and avoid the hard conversation. I had seen this pattern my entire life. Sit down at the table, share a meal, repeat "we're family," until the problem faded without ever being addressed. I wasn't going to let that happen again. I called my mother and calmly told her not to come to the airport, that I needed a few days. She pleaded and said my father was trying, but I ended the call and phoned Rebecca instead. I told her when I was landing and asked when we could officially file the complaint. She said the paperwork was ready but added that the notary, Greg Parson, had agreed to cooperate. That meant he was nervous, and nervous people tend to tell the truth. Later that night in an airport hotel, I almost called my mother again. Part of me still wanted to believe this could be fixed with an apology, that I could walk back into the past and everything would feel safe again. But I knew that version of the past wasn't real. When I arrived at my apartment near Fort Liberty the next afternoon, exhausted from travel, I unlocked the door, stepped inside and froze when I heard voices. My father was sitting comfortably on my couch, my mother was unpacking groceries in the kitchen, and Vivian was leaning against the counter with her phone. They greeted me like it was a surprise party. My mother rushed toward me in tears, my sister offered a dessert box, and my father smiled in a way that felt forced. I noticed my spare key on the counter and asked how they got in. My mother reminded me I had given her the emergency key before deployment. I had, only for true emergencies. I told them I had asked them not to come. The mood shifted instantly. My father stood up and said they didn't need an invitation because I was their daughter. I kept my tone steady and reminded them that using that key without permission was not what I had intended. "This isn't an emergency," I said calmly. "This is a boundary. Please leave." No one moved. The refrigerator hummed in the background. Vivian gave a small, awkward laugh and said it was just dinner, but I repeated myself and held the door open. My father looked at the doorway, then at me, and sat back down. He asked if I was really going to throw away my family over a house. I told him this was never just about property. He said my grandmother would be disappointed in me. I told him not to speak for her. He insisted he was her son and believed he knew what she wanted. My mother stepped in, trying to calm things down, saying I didn't understand the pressure they had been under and how much Vivian had invested. She warned that if I continued, I would ruin my sister's business and damage our family's name. I answered that my trust had already been broken the moment my name was signed without my permission. The word "forged" seemed to freeze the room. My sister's tone changed, sharper now, saying I was never around and hadn't even attended the funeral. I told her I stayed away because Dad told me not to come. She looked surprised. My mother stared at the floor. My father finally stood and walked toward the door. Before leaving, he leaned close and warned that if I went forward with this, I would lose my family. I looked him in the eye and said I had felt alone for a long time. They left one by one. I locked the door, called a locksmith to change the locks, and then called Rebecca and told her to move ahead. She filed the case that Monday, naming both my father and sister as defendants and listing fraud, forgery, misuse of property, and breach of responsibility. She also requested that the evidence be sent to the district attorney for possible criminal charges. 2 days later, a process server delivered the papers to my childhood home. I wasn't there, but relatives quickly told me how shocked my parents looked when they read the summons. Vivian was served separately the same day as a co-defendant who benefited from the funds. That evening my father called repeatedly and I let each call go unanswered. Vivian left one voicemail asking if I was truly suing my own sister over a house. By the end of the week, my parents were telling relatives that I had turned against them. My mother posted a vague message online about heartbreak. Some family members called me upset or confused and I told them all the same thing. Come to court and hear the facts. At the same time, Rebecca filed a criminal complaint with the district attorney, so both the civil case and the criminal review could move forward together. The hearing was set for a Tuesday in October at Courtroom 3B, a small brick courthouse with a flagpole out front and a parking lot that smelled of hot asphalt. I arrived 20 minutes early wearing my full Class A dress uniform. Olive jacket, brass buttons, captain's bars on my shoulders, and the unit crest on my left pocket. Rebecca suggested it. She said the uniform made it clear to the court that an active duty officer's rights had been violated. She met me in the hallway carrying a 3-inch thick leather binder. Behind her, Major Crow sat quietly on a bench, on leave to attend as a character witness. He nodded at me, no words needed. In the third row, Maggie Calloway sat with her hands folded, white hair pinned back, wearing the blue cardigan my grandmother had given her. A small photo album rested beside her. At 9:47 the courtroom door opened. My father entered first, dark suit, red tie, stiff posture, but his eyes were bloodshot and jaw tight. My mother followed in a black dress, tissue in hand, spotting me immediately. Vivian came last, also in black, dark circles under her eyes, avoiding my gaze. Their attorney, Gerald Pratt, competent for small-town real estate but clearly out of his depth in a fraud case with federal implications, guided them to the far table. I later learned my father had called 3 other firms first. 2 declined and the third quoted a retainer he couldn't afford. He looked across the aisle at me, his expression flickering with surprise or recognition, seeing the daughter he'd dismissed standing there in the uniform he had once worn she'd regret wearing. I held his gaze briefly, then turned to the bench as Judge Patricia Whitmore entered. She was in her late 50s, reading glasses on a chain, voice calm but commanding. We all rose. She reviewed the filings and addressed Rebecca. Counsel for the plaintiff, proceed. Rebecca stood steady and deliberate. Your Honor, the plaintiff, Captain Helena Wolfe, is the sole named beneficiary of the property at 1140 Lakeshore Drive, Lake Meredith, according to the last will and testament of Margaret E. Wolfe, deceased. She opened her binder and continued. We will show that the defendant, Richard Wolfe, created a fraudulent power of attorney with the plaintiff's forged signature, had it improperly notarized, and used it to sell the property for $450,000 while the plaintiff was deployed overseas on active duty. She presented the evidence clearly. Exhibit A, the forensic handwriting analysis from Dr. Linda Pace, showing 99.7% certainty the signature was not mine. Exhibit B, my military deployment orders, proving I was physically in the Middle East on March 14 and could not have signed anything in North Carolina. Exhibit C, property transfer records showing the $450,000 went directly into an account registered to Vivian R. Wolfe. The courtroom was silent as each piece of evidence was laid out, undeniable and precise. Exhibit D included text messages from both defendants, clearly showing knowledge and intent. Rebecca highlighted Vivian's message to me with the photo of the restaurant sign saying, "Thanks for your service," along with Instagram posts where she wrote, "Our whole family came together." Then she presented bank records showing the $450,000 deposit went straight into Vivian's personal account. Not a family account or a trust, just her name and her account. The evidence made it clear. Vivian didn't just benefit from the fraud, She knew where the money came from and publicly celebrated it. The defense attorney stood adjusting his glasses. Your Honor, my client believed he acted in the family's best interest. There was a verbal understanding. Judge Whitmore asked sharply, was there written authorization from the property owner? No, Your Honor, he admitted. Then there was no authorization. Continue. Richard Wolfe was called to the stand. He straightened his tie facing the court. My mother wasn't thinking clearly when she wrote that will. The house was always meant to stay in the family. Judge Whitmore looked over her glasses. Mr. Wolfe, was your mother declared mentally incompetent by any medical professional? No. Did you contest the will during probate? No. Then the will stands as written. He slumped in his chair as the judge made her note. Rebecca asked for one more witness, Margaret Calloway. Maggie stood carefully, smoothing the blue cardigan my grandmother had given her, and walked to the stand. Mrs. Calloway, how long did you know Margaret Wolfe? 2 years. She was my neighbor and my dearest friend. She was sharp, balanced her own checkbook until 3 weeks before her death, and I drove with her to the attorney's office the day she signed the will. She walked out alone and said clearly, it's done. Helena gets the house. Rebecca asked if she had anything else to add. Maggie looked directly at my father. Richard will try to take it. That's why I'm putting it in Helena's name, not the family. Helena. The courtroom went still. Then Maggie added, her voice cracking slightly, she tried to call Helena for 2 years before she passed. She'd phone Richard's house and ask him to pass a message. He never did. She believed I'd been forgotten and she wasn't. A heavy silence filled the room. Relatives shifted uncomfortably. My Aunt Janet pressed a hand to her mouth. My mother covered her face. Vivian stared at the table and my father remained frozen, unblinking, unable to respond. Mrs. Wolfe wasn't confused, Maggie said quietly. She wasn't worried about dying. She was worried about what her son might do after she was gone. Judge Whitmore nodded and thanked her. She spent the next 15 minutes reviewing her notes in silence. The courtroom was still except for my mother's soft, steady crying. Finally, the judge removed her glasses and addressed my father. The court finds clear and convincing evidence that Richard H. Wolfe forged a power of attorney in Helena Wolfe's name, had it notarized by a notary with whom he had a prior professional relationship, and used it to sell property belonging to the plaintiff while she was deployed on active military duty. Exploiting this period when the plaintiff could not protect her own property is deeply troubling. She continued, reviewing the documents. The power of attorney is fraudulent, and the resulting sale is a product of forgery. Because the property has been transferred to a good faith buyer, the sale will not be reversed. Instead, the defendants must pay full restitution of $450,000 to the plaintiff, plus $85,000 in additional damages for loss of use, legal costs, and compensation. The court will also forward these findings to the district attorney for criminal review. She looked directly at him. Mr. Wolfe, the law does not allow excuses and your actions show no good intentions. Richard remained frozen. His attorney whispered something, he didn't respond. Slowly, his hands opened, his head dropped, and he slumped in the chair as if all the weight of control had been taken from him. Diane cried out, Vivian jumped, and the bailiff moved forward. But it wasn't a medical emergency. For the first time in his life, a man who had ruled over his family, his bank, and his mother's legacy had lost it all in one afternoon. With help, he stood and walked out, one hand against the wall, moving like a man decades older. I gathered my things when my mother appeared in the hallway. Her face was tense, blotched, furious. Are you happy now? You've destroyed your father, she said, blocking my path. I looked at her. The same woman who had used my emergency key to ambush me, watched her husband forge my name, and posted about my supposed ingratitude while I was thousands of miles away building the case that brought this truth to light that he destroyed himself. Mom, I just brought the evidence, I said. She opened her mouth, then closed it, finally stepping aside. Down the hall, Vivian stood alone, her attorney already gone. She gripped her purse strap so tightly her knuckles were white. The restaurant, she whispered. Pie restaurant. Rebecca stepped forward calmly. Ms. Wolfe, I suggest you speak with your attorney about restitution options. I walked past them into the bright October sunlight. Outside, Maggie stood by the stone bench. She saw me, stood and opened her arms. I stepped in, pressed my face against the blue cardigan she wore, my grandmother's cardigan, and cried. Not for victory, I said. There's no victory here. Just getting back what was taken at a cost no one should pay. She'd be proud of you, Maggie whispered into my hair. Across the parking lot, Major Crow leaned against his car, arms folded, and gave a single knowing nod. That was enough. I drove home alone, silent, the radio off. I propped my grandmother's photo from the lake on the dashboard and just sat, letting the quiet stretch. In the weeks after the hearing, the district attorney opened a formal investigation into the forgery. My father hired a criminal defense attorney, different from the civil case, and the retainer alone cost more than his car was worth. The notary, Greg Parson, folded immediately. His statement was simple. Richard Wolf claimed it was a family arrangement, and said I had verbally agreed. He never verified my identity, confirmed my presence, or followed any legal procedure. Parsons' notary license was suspended, pending review. The new owners of the lake house, the Brennans, retirees from Charlotte, bought in good faith. The court protected their ownership. My restitution would come from my father and sister, not them. The total amount, $535,000, including restitution and damages, had to be paid in structured installments within 90 days, or we'd return to court for contempt. Vivian's restaurant, open just 4 months, was already losing money. Every dollar she'd poured into Maggie May's table came from the money stolen from me, built on a document that never should have existed. Rebecca called on a Friday afternoon. The system is moving, Helena. Let it do its work. I hung up, sat on the porch, and watched the sun sink. My father was poring over criminal statutes with a lawyer he couldn't afford. I didn't feel better. I just felt right. In small towns, news travels fast. Within 2 weeks of the hearing, everyone in my parents' circle knew the truth that I didn't tell anyone. I didn't post a word. The courtroom did the work for me. A small item appeared in the local paper's court proceedings. A civil fraud case involving a forged power of attorney and the sale of a deceased woman's property. No names were mentioned and criminal charges weren't filed yet. But in a town of 11,000, everyone knew who lived on Lakeshore Drive. The calls started slowly. First, my Aunt Janet, crying. I knew something was wrong at Thanksgiving with the house. I should have said something. I'm sorry, Helena. I told her it was okay, she hadn't known. Then cousins, old friends, people from my grandmother's funeral reached out. Voicemails, short texts, awkward but kind. Some admitted they had called me ungrateful before and were ashamed. I replied the same way to all. Thank you. I appreciate you reaching out, but I need time. Not everyone was gentle. A few of Vivian's friends sent angry messages, full of accusations I didn't even finish reading. They didn't know me, only her story. One text stood out from Frank, an old neighbor of my parents who'd known my grandmother since the 1980s. Your grandmother was a good woman who raised a good granddaughter. I'm sorry it came to this. I saved that one. I read it on nights I doubted whether pursuing this was worth the chaos. It reminded me it was. Money exposed what character hid. Vivian couldn't pay back what she'd spent. Maggie May's table had never made a profit. It was a dream built on stolen funds and someone else's legacy. Within 6 weeks, Vivian sold the restaurant's equipment, negotiated an early lease termination for $8,000 she didn't have, and took down the sign with my grandmother's name. My father's situation was worse. Legal fees climbed, retirement savings shrank, and they sold the family home on Burwood Lane, the house where he had always made the rules. They moved into a small rental. My mother sent one final text. I hope you can live with yourself. I read it, didn't respond, just saved it. Vivian moved to Asheville to manage a restaurant she didn't own. No Instagram posts, no sign, no legacy. I didn't celebrate. There's nothing to celebrate when your family collapses, even when it's their fault. But I did one thing. I used part of the restitution to start a scholarship at my old high school for seniors planning to serve in the military, Peace Corps, or other service abroad. I named it the Margaret Wolf Memorial Scholarship, not for recognition but because my grandmother always said, help those who have no one in their corner. She would have liked that. One Saturday in November I found myself driving toward Lake Meredith without planning it. Just running errands, dry cleaning and oil change, the usual routines of a life being put back together. The road felt familiar, like my body remembered it even when my mind tried to forget. The house was still there, painted soft gray instead of white, with a new fence and the old swing gone. In the yard, the new owners had planted tall sunflowers leaning toward the road. I pulled over and turned off the engine. Through the side yard I could see the dock, the same shape, the same weathered wood, and the water behind it, flat and silver in the November light. I remembered being 12, sitting with my grandmother on that dock, her feet in the water, reading a paperback. "Because water always finds its way, Helena," she said without looking up. "You can block it or redirect it, but it always moves forward." I looked at the sunflowers. Nothing about the property was mine anymore. Not the paint, the fence, or the dock. But that memory was mine. No forged signature could take it, no court could award it to someone else. I started the engine, pulled back onto the road, and let a country song play quietly on the radio as I rolled down the window. The house wasn't mine, but what it had taught me, that no one could steal what truly belonged to me, was. 6 months went by. I stayed at Fort Liberty, promoted into a logistics position I had requested before deployment. The Army didn't care about family drama, it cared about results. I worked steadily, renting a modest one-bedroom near Jordan Lake with a shared dock. Saturday mornings I sat there with coffee watching the herons glide over the shallows. It wasn't Lake Meredith and it wasn't my grandmother's house, but it was calm and nothing was breaking. I didn't contact my parents. My mother sent 2 handwritten letters, full of hurt and accusation with a tiny hint of regret in the second. I put them in a drawer. My father was navigating his criminal plea through his attorney. Rebecca updated me when necessary, which was enough. Vivian stayed silent in Asheville working. The person I spoke to most was Maggie Calloway. Every Sunday afternoon we talked about small things, her garden, my work, the lake's weather, and sometimes she shared stories about my grandmother. "I know," she said once, "but I'm here as long as you need." I also joined a local veteran support group on Wednesday evenings. For the first month I didn't share my story, I just listened, learning to settle into life again without the chaos of the past. When I finally shared a little of my story in the veteran support group, without complaint or self-pity, a few people nodded. They'd experienced loss too, different losses, but the feeling was familiar. One woman said, "You didn't lose your family in combat. You lost them at a notary's desk." I never forgot that. Then the letter arrived, sent by Vivian through Maggie because she didn't know my new address. 2 handwritten pages, front and back, in Vivian's tight, slanted script. Maggie called first, saying she wanted me to know it was coming. That evening I opened it on my screened porch as the last light filtered through the trees. Vivian didn't start with an apology, she started with a confession. She knew the money came from the house, she knew Dad forged my signature, and she let it happen while convincing herself it wasn't her problem. She wrote about the restaurant, admitting it had failed, not because of the lawsuit but because there was never a real plan, and that she'd used Grandma's name as a brand she hadn't earned. She didn't ask for forgiveness. At the end she wrote, "You don't owe me anything. I just needed you to know I understand what I did and that it was wrong." I read it twice, listened to the frogs by the lake, and realized it didn't matter if she was sincere or performing. My peace didn't depend on her. I wrote back one short paragraph. "I read your letter. Thank you for writing it. I'm not ready for more than that. Take care of yourself, Vivian." I mailed it the next morning. It wasn't an open door, but it wasn't a wall either. It was a boundary. I'm sharing this not for sympathy or to make anyone hate my family. I'm sharing it because I know some of you are listening and recognize it. The parent who takes your silence as permission, the sibling who keeps taking and calls it family, the loved one who made a decision about your life and property and told you were the problem when you said no. If that's you, know this. You are not ungrateful for protecting yourself, you are not selfish for saying no, and you are not alone. My grandmother taught me that water always finds its way. I lost her lake house. I lost the family I thought I had. But I found my own path, through a small apartment by Jordan Lake, through a courtroom in my uniform, and through a Sunday phone call with Maggie Calloway, who promised she'd look out for me. Setting a boundary isn't punishment. It's self-respect with a return address. I don't know what comes next with my father, Vivian, or my mother. Maybe we'll meet again. Maybe we won't. But whatever happens, it will happen on my terms, not on terms forged in my name while I was 6,000 miles away, serving a country that at least honors its agreements in writing. If you've ever set a boundary, or are working up the courage to, share your story in the comments. I read every one. Thank you for listening and staying with me to the end. And if this story stayed with you, one question. Which moment hit hardest? The judge's ruling or me standing at the lake one last time? Drop your answer below, and if you want more stories about courage over comfort, family drama that ends in justice, or boundaries that changed everything, check the description. I'll see you in the next one. Thank you for being here.